The American people do not want a president who incarcerated black men on simple marijuana charges and then gloated about smoking marijuana in her college days.
It was a long time ago.
That's not the BLM supporter we have seen.
One thing I know for sure is that Trump doesn't have political motivations to do the wrong thing. That's not what I believe happens with Kamala Harris. We have a candidate who appears to at least genuinely say things that people don't like. And we have one who is trying to appease all of the people that like her, as well as all of the people who want to retain power structures.
Right.
And it's very concerning if somebody like that gets into office. I think the first thing that you need to do is take a sip of your cup of coffee right there. That's what I think. That's where I think we need to start this entire show off. Perfect.
And I think that kind of says everything right there without saying a word.
It really does. It says everything about the state of our country. It says everything about the choices that we're going to be able to make on certain people. And it says everything about how I feel about some of the things that we're going to talk about today, and specifically some of the people.
My hope is that people really will look at this as a place to come to hear the facts, to hear unbiased positions on what transpired in federal, civil, and criminal cases that either went through an appellate process or wound up at the Supreme Court, and what the results were and how they impact the political landscape, how they impact us as average citizens each and every single day in our lives.
We're going to have to go all the way back to 1983, which pre-show I informed you was the year of my birth.
That was the first time that I realized I was that much older than you.
Yeah. Wait till somebody like my daughter comes to me and says, Are you from the 1900s? Floored. Immediately. I feel so old. Oh, it's fantastic. So probably shouldn't laugh too much because the Chino massacre was absolutely terrible. So basically this involves a nasty homicide allegedly committed with a hatchet back in 1983. There was only one survivor of the attack, and hopefully we can put some of the pictures up here for you so that you can see the real humanity in this story. Josh Ryan was 8 years old. He survived this attack, but the rest of the people, including his parents, didn't survive, right? There was an attack with a hatchet. Yeah. Now, interestingly, when he was videotaped and investigated, this young Josh Ryan, during that investigation, they learned that he believed that it was 3 suspects. And I think I've heard somewhere that it was potentially 3 white suspects. So obviously with a significant murder like this that goes down, we've got a white family, we've got blood everywhere, we've got a potential hatchet used, we've got dirty circumstances. The cops have a rush to find a suspect. And let me tell you, Sean, this public rush to find a suspect is the absolute number one cause of every wrongful conviction, right? You've got a DA and you've got a police chief or county sheriff or state police or FBI agent or whatever who feels that they are responsible to the public for finding somebody very quickly and capturing them. And once you find somebody, once you have that perp walk happen with that one suspect, and you have everybody with their pitchforks and, their torches out ready to go after that person, saying, hang on a second, we've made a bad decision here. Absolutely impossible to do. Absolutely impossible to do. I will tell you that in a most recent trial that I had that resulted in an acquittal, the prosecutor and I were sort of having that like Top Gun, like head on our lockers kind of talk between Maverick and Iceman, where we kind of just took the armor off and just chatted about it. And he told me sometimes these things get put in motion and you just can't stop them. Those are frightening words when we're talking about a human being's life.
Absolutely frightening. But let me ask you this question, Ron. Thinking back into the 80s, right? Now, I know you were a little kid in the 80s. But here's the thing. As a criminal defense attorney, do you feel that things have changed in the way that during the 80s, maybe the lack of sophistication in equipment to do things like DNA testing, where, this is our guy, this is our lady, this is our perp, this is who we're going after,
Yep.
period.
Yeah.
Do you think any of that has changed where
No.
we are now in 2024, even with the
Well,
advancements?
it's changed. Absolutely, it's gotten a lot worse, right? Look at the case, and this is one I really wanted to reserve judgment on because I have no idea what happened. In
Right.
fact, I don't really judge any case other than judging the evidence that there is to potentially prosecute. That's the best way to look at it. But look at the Brian Koberger case. Ironically, we have a killing of multiple people. We've got a sharp weapon of some sort, and we have a sheath. Exactly what we have in this case here, right? But in the Koberger case, the evidence is solely DNA evidence. It's solely science, right? And so the problem that we're having here is where there used to be a requirement for eyewitness testimony that we would expect to see in this case, in the Cooper case, and in the Kohlberger case, a witness. We need someone, or we need some motive, or we need some other evidence other than purely physical or DNA evidence to build our case off of. Now, with the forensic tools available, prosecutors are building their cases off of one single thing because they know that they can put enough people on a witness stand to make that DNA evidence look rock solid and wow a jury. And the number of convictions that are based solely on DNA evidence are frightening, right? Because these numbers come out that are impossible to rebut. There is a 1 in 32 million chance that this guy did it. First of all, that's not true. People who are making those numbers up often are pulling from a bunch of different areas to try to calculate the probability of something happening. But what they fail to recognize is that cross contamination and these other issues could completely destroy that 1 in 32 million calculation.
What
Um,
about laboratory technician tampering?
Exactly. I mean, look at the Oklahoma City case, right? I am not out here saying that Timothy McVeigh is innocent, but what I am saying is that the defense attorneys who challenged the physical evidence in that case had a pretty good case for a sloppy lab that should never be used to convict anybody. So, really, that's the concern that we have. We continue to hear stories about rape kits that are piled up and not tested. We continue to hear stories about labs that have failed and a whole bunch of convictions need to be looked at. The problem is when those lab errors are identified, we don't really see people giving the benefit of the doubt to the defendant. We see them still giving the benefit of the doubt to the cops. When we find out that there's a dirty prosecutor, we're not immediately going and returning all the case. When you find out we have a judge with a conflict, the problem is that once that perp walk happens, that defendant is 99.9% of the time screwed. That's
Yeah.
just how it is. And
Well,
that's
because then
just
it calls into question all of their other cases that were handled by the prosecutor,
yep,
by the judge,
yep,
by the
yep,
cops that are involved in the
yeah,
case. And,
yeah.
one mistake could lead to reversal of dozens,
If
maybe
you
in some
arrested
cases, hundreds.
if you arrested the wrong guy, then you were at fault. And what politician, and this is the problem with our officials being politicians, what politician is going to change that? So, we're going to get into Kamala Harris here, but here's the real problem with somebody like Kamala Harris. If in any of these cases she stood up and she said, I don't like this conviction, I feel that I need to do something about it. I don't want to be unburdened by what has been, or whatever the hell she likes to say, right? So poor Kevin Cooper has to sit in jail because we need votes, right?
On death row, not just sitting in jail.
Yeah, yeah,
He's sitting on death row in one of the most one of the places I would least like to ever visit, not only
yeah,
as an inmate, but
yep.
as just an outsider. I have no desire to ever see San Quentin.
Absolutely terrible. I have a client right now. We won't get into it on this podcast, but he's currently sitting in a jail. Every morning that I wake up, he is my first thought. Every night before I go to bed, he is my last thought before I go to bed, and I cannot be at peace until that changes. And that's the way I feel about somebody who is a non-violent offender, a non-institutionalized person, somebody who doesn't know how to handle it. Um, you know, Kevin Cooper, he was coming from a different place. he knows how to survive in that environment, but it doesn't make it any less tragic because what we're dealing with is the denial of the human right to live.
Yeah. But let me
That's
ask you a
tragic.
question,
Yeah.
yeah, and I agree with you 100%.
Mhm.
And I wanna ask you this question.
Yeah.
Is it is it and I understand where you're going from the political, part of what you were talking about with losing the support of the police chief, losing the support of the police vote, the backing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But in a case like this, right, with Mr. Cooper, where the crime happened in 1983, and the guy's been sitting on death row, I think since what, 1985, 2
Yep.
years after the supposed crime took place.
Mhm.
This was well before Kamala Harris was the attorney general, well before she was the district attorney. So
Yep.
my question to you is, if she were to come in and say, "Look, I have a lot of concerns about this case. Wasn't my case. I'm not going to disparage anybody, but things don't add up."
Yeah.
And I realize you have to have a conscience to say that, and I realize you have to have a soul to say that, and a
Mhm.
moral compass that points in the right direction.
Yeah.
And let the listeners, the viewers of this program, make a determination for themselves as to whether or not she has those things or lacks those things. That's not for me to say, because personally, I don't know the woman.
Yeah.
What I know is what the record shows, the limited record that's out there,
Yeah.
which is extremely concerning. But who cares if you lose the support of a police chief who wasn't the police chief in 1983, or if you lose the support? Are you really trashing the police station, the officers of today for the shoddy, sloppy, criminalistic work? Is criminalistic a term?
I think so, and if it's not, then I will email Webster as soon as we're done, and let's make it happen.
Put it into the
We can
Urban
do big things,
Dictionary.
Sean. Yeah.
But,
Good. Th-
why not do the right thing, right? Why not do the right thing?
Because the right thing is not encouraged in our current system of government, right? And this isn't a left or right thing. This is a problem with the way this has been handled. If she stands up right now and says, of course, she doesn't have the power to do that right now. She's vice president. She's in the federal system, not the state system. But if she stood up in her last day as a prosecutor and said, I'm advocating for release. I'm asking the governor to do this, or maybe she could even ask Newsom right now. In fact, that's probably the way that this could happen. Right now, she could ask Newsom to free Kevin Cooper, and that could happen. But if she did that, everybody who's worked on the case um, since then, there's been a lot of work on the case. The judges that have issued decisions, right, all the way up to the California Supreme Court, all the way up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, those judges that have issued opinions that have kept him in, she is kind of denying them the benefit of their hard work, and she's second guessing their judgment. All of these people in writing these opinions are saying, no, we're supporting keeping him in because we're trusting the cops
Right.
with their investigation. But as soon as that changes, as soon as Kamala Harris kind of usurps all of that and says, let this guy go, then she's no longer a friend, she's a foe, and she doesn't get the votes that she wants. So
Yeah.
what she will do in this case is walk that careful tightrope between pretending to people that she is about justice and equality, but while simultaneously holding the heads of certain people down in order to appease those people in power that she needs to appease. And this is what we are doing on this program. We are
Right.
showing those very human stories and not letting them sweep those things under the rug, under this what I call bureaucratic malice, right? This idea that if we separate responsibility for everything into 1,000 little chunks, nobody ever really did anything wrong. I'm
Right.
just the governor. I decide pardons, right? I'm just one investigator in the case. I just handled this piece of evidence. Or I was just the prosecutor. My deputies actually handled this case.
That's right.
Nobody gets to wash themselves of Kevin Cooper, right? In the realm of public opinion. If people start to learn about this, they
Right.
can take that out at the polls and they cannot vote somebody like this in because she's going to do the same thing in our justice system going forward. Next thing when it comes to making a decision about all of those individuals with marijuana or low level drug convictions, when she has to go to the sentencing commission and say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, these crack sentences, these drug sentences are disproportionately affecting young black males. Is she going to do it? No, she's not going to do it. When she has to go to the sentencing commission or Congress and say, listen, the presumption of detention, and this is something that impacted one of my clients recently, the presumption of detention, you get detained if you've been convicted of a drug offense, no matter what, you get thrown behind bars before appeal. That presumption needs to be repealed because it has a disproportionate impact on minorities. Will she do anything to change it? Based on what she did with Kevin Cooper, no. And so we need to tell these stories, Jamal Trulove, Kevin Cooper, so that people can understand you're not going to be able to get it here. Not with somebody like this. You
Yeah.
might be able to get it with somebody who understands what it's like to be wrongfully convicted of a felony based on bullshit circumstances, right?
Yeah.
You might get
Yeah.
it from him. I don't know. We'll
Yeah.
see.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
think what happens is, and again, I spent a lot of time dealing with Capitol Hill, upper lower chambers of Congress, both sides of the aisle, Republican, Democrat alike. I work with independents. I think what it comes down to is what is most politically expedient
Yeah.
and what is going to be good for them, irrespective of
Yeah.
who it injures. And I want to be crystal clear about this, right? Because the when you look at what I see going on right now in the political landscape with
Hmm.
the dynamic shift that is taking place, where people would always say the Democratic Party is the party of the people, that doesn't appear to be the case anymore,
No.
and we're seeing a dynamic shift to coming away from the left back to a center or a center right, where they're looking
Yeah.
at the Republican Party saying, "Hey, wait a minute. They're speaking to the things that are concerning us, right? Which is
Yep.
social justice reform, disproportionate, crime, here in the low income areas." And
Yeah.
I think for me, if people could put the race card down, right, and not make this about black versus white, but look at what the systemic problems are within each segment, each part of our population, and look at what the underlying factors are that drive this type of behavior, criminal activity, regardless of whether it's misdemeanor crimes or felony crimes. There's something that is going on, but taking a deeper dive into why we have elected officials who have these tainted pasts and why they're being covered up. And I
Yeah.
think it's absolutely incredulous that some of these um, news reporting agencies, and I have one later where they have literally taken down the website that was posted advocating for all the reasons why Kamala Harris was not fit to be president in 2020, but now
Right.
because she is the pallbearer,
Yeah. The Paul
the pallbearer.
the I
I know
that's
you corrected me and you said the standard
that's
bearer, but I think in
no,
light of
it's
everything
Freud.
going on, she's the pallbearer.
It's
Um,
it's I think it's Freudian. I love it. It's
Yeah, they
fantastic.
took it
Yeah.
down. They
Yeah.
they took down this website.
I listen, let
Yeah,
me go back to the race card thing.
yeah, please.
Famous last words, right? Uh I I'm okay with the race card. I'm okay with it. And here's why. Injustice against any one of us is injustice against all of us.
Agreed.
That's really important, right? So,
Yeah,
I'm just a lawyer. I'm not a politician, so I get to think in black and white terms of like justice and injustice, and I get to wonder if our laws are being used correctly. But you see injustice occur more frequently to the least of us. You see
yeah,
it happen to people who are downtrodden, who don't have the financial resources to defend themselves. who have to rely on public defenders who might be overburdened and underpaid, who don't have the access to the evidence that they need to be able to take care of stuff. You'll notice that one of the defendants was black in that trial. So that was
Just one.
1968
Just one.
Democratic. Yep, 1968 Democratic Convention. They rounded up a whole bunch of people. They got 8 of them who were supposed to be the kind of riot starters, and one of them happened to be, I think, either was or accused to be part of the Black Panther Party, and they also had him arrested on a gun charge somewhere else. And during the trial, they kept him detained. His lawyer couldn't help him out. They bound him and gagged him in court, and the disparity there is very important for everybody to recognize. So, 7 defendants are white, 1 is black, all being treated poorly, right? Because this was clearly a free speech type case. This was kind of like a January 6th, but for hippies. That's
Yeah.
kind of what it was,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I
That's a
mean,
good analogy.
they were told they couldn't be there. We're told can't be in the Capitol. They went there. They, I think maybe a bit more peacefully did some things. I don't mean to say that it's completely analogous,
Right.
but then charges were levied against a whole bunch of people, including these people in federal court, where a very, very strict district judge ended up dropping the hammer disproportionately on one black man, but also disproportionately on 7 white men. Now, let me ask you this. Had those 7 white men not been included in that case, would it have worked out that way? Right? What if that one black protester was isolated and singled out and tried and denied a fair trial? What would have happened? And to go back to the whole point about the race card, maybe instead of playing the race card or calling it the race card, what we really need to do is take a look at the system that has the flaw, understand that that flaw has an impact on all of us, and then deal with that flaw instead of saying it's a white and black problem. Because saying it's a white and black problem kind of says, I am more disproportionately impacted than you. Therefore, I need some form of justice. And my response to that is no. If you are impacted, we are all impacted. Every single one of
Absolutely.
us.
No,
Our
I
system
think
is
that's a great
impacted.
way to look at it. No, I agree. I
That's
agree.
that's how I feel about it. So, with that trial, I mean, fascinating story, fascinating script written by Aaron Sorkin. If you don't want to read anything about it and you want to just watch a wonderful movie, I think it's fantastic. But let's get back on Cooper here because we've got a
Yeah.
lot to cover.
Yeah.
So
And then we'll
there's
switch to
there's
Jamal Trulove.
there's a rush, and this serial burglar Kevin Cooper.
Yeah.
Um, had escaped from a nearby prison and was picked up. And I guess one of the reasons that they picked him up is because he'd been hiding in a house just 125 yards from the home, right? Mysterious circumstances that are maybe too crazy to be a coincidence. That's often what causes these types of things to happen. The authorities found a hatchet used in the murders down the road from the home, and 2 other weapons used in the murders, a knife and an ice pick, were never found. Get this, three suspects identified by the young boy at the house. 3 potential murder weapons, one of them found nearby, but they have 1 suspect who had just escaped from an institution and could not have had 3 buddies around who were interested in carrying around ice picks and knives in order to randomly murder a white family. Who escapes from a facility like this in order to commit a triple homicide? He was a serial burglar, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Burglars
No,
don't
no, no
do
past history of any
yeah.
violence.
Yeah, no.
Um,
No,
and
this
he was
this
in, and I think it's important to make sure people understand that if this guy was truly a threat to human life, okay, he was obviously a threat to human, to property,
yeah.
as a serial burglar.
Yeah.
But if he was truly a threat to human life, and especially thinking back to what the criminal justice system was in the 80s, this guy would not have been in a minimum security prison in Chino.
Yeah. That's that's a really good point. I think you need to be on the defense team there, Sean. That's a great thought. Further down the road, the authorities found a bloodstained tan t-shirt and a towel believed to come from the Ryan home. Some of the bloodstains matched Doug Ryan's blood type. None were found to match Kevin Cooper. So we've got more physical evidence recovered, not matching the defendant. I don't know how you end up carrying a bloody T-shirt down a road, or why you would, that you somehow, at least they were honest enough to say that there was no DNA evidence from Kevin Cooper on the shirt. That is absolutely crazy and mysterious to me. So when police recovered the station wagon and the family nearly 50 miles away, they found blood on 3 of the seats. We're a few days after the murder at this point, right? And so on a second search of the car, first search didn't reveal anything. Deputies found 2 cigarette butts, 1 match tobacco typically used by inmates. That's that's our sole piece of evidence right now that somebody from a correctional facility might have done it. Um, do we maybe have a situation where a car was stolen, but not a murder? Possibly. I don't know. I don't know if they had to get in the house to get the keys. That might be part of the investigation. A state expert analyzed a single drop of blood from the home found in the hallway, away from the crime scene. It was so small, it can't even be seen on a close-up photograph. I'm hoping that we could show the photograph there,
Yeah.
to everybody so that they can see this little disc with, a detective pointing a pen at this little drop of blood. That's the only drop of blood they found. The criminalist first said the blood drop was one blood type and later said it was another, matching Kevin Cooper's blood type. That's our evidence right now.
Yeah.
A
So
blood type match. What
yeah.
what are the odds of that?
So listen. So staying on that, right?
Yeah.
So they say that one sample was conclusively determined to have come from a black person with the same blood group as Cooper.
Yeah.
The sample, though, was too small to determine if it was Cooper's rare, rare blood type, not
Yeah.
his blood type, his rare blood type. But here's the most interesting thing. And this is where I think people have to put aside any preconceived notions. You have to put aside, this is why I tell people all the time, stop listening to mainstream media. Stop
Yeah.
listening to these talking heads and do your own independent research. That's what we do. That's why we are confident when we talk about these things that we're giving you facts. But listen to this crazy thing. Talking about this rare blood type, okay?
Yeah.
The DNA was then compared to DNA from Cooper's blood. It matched. But you ready for this? The odds of the match being by chance were 1 in 310 billion.
Wow.
Billion,
We
not million,
Yeah.
billion with a B.
We
How
definitely got the right guy then. Definitely. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
how could we not? But here's
Yeah.
one last thing that I want to share with you. Um, there was a girlfriend involved in this of a former inmate who was a friend of Cooper's. And it was this girlfriend of this former inmate friend of Cooper
Yeah.
who thought that it might have been her boyfriend who was involved in the murder. And she, listen to this, she turned over his bloody coveralls to the local USAPIA. I don't know how, if I'm saying that correctly, YUCAIPA, sheriff's substation, but they threw out the coveralls without even testing them. Why?
It's destruction of evidence. It's something I'm working on right now in a pretty massive case that I hope I can talk about at some point. But let's just dive into the law there.
Yeah.
And this is an unfortunate part of the law, but there's a case called Youngblood,
Okay.
ironically, right?
Yep.
Youngblood says that when police decide to destroy or fail to preserve a piece of evidence, you need to show that that evidence would have been exculpatory, and you need to show that the police acted in bad faith. Everything in law kind of hinges on this subjective standard in the end. It's like they give you an objective test, but then they always put this little subjective hook on the end of it so that the judges can kind of decide what they want to do. And Youngblood is a very good example of that. What is bad faith? How do we prove bad faith? Is it like violation of a policy? You would think that that would be bad faith. Is it knowing violation of a policy? We have a good habit of holding people responsible to certain standards under the law and convicting them for certain things. But when it's time to look at police and bad faith, It's really hard to find a case. In fact, there are virtually no cases where courts have found bad faith against prosecutors. I mean, there's some, but it's just very, very rare to find. And so in a case like that, you would have to prove, and proving that is very difficult because you don't have access to their internal files and their memoranda. You could ask for the emails of the cops. Back then, you could ask for the memos or whatever they've typed up about why they destroyed the overalls. They're not going to give it to you. So you have to prove without that information that they knew that those would be exculpatory, and then they destroyed it. And here's the problem with that concept of bureaucratic malice. There's some departments that might have collected this information, but just like in the Alec Baldwin case, they put it under a different file number. And they say, oh, this is a new report of a new offense. So let's not give it to the detectives that are involved in the Cooper investigation or the Baldwin investigation. Let's be a corrupt prosecutor. By the way, she is going to get prosecuted.
Oh,
And
absolutely
yeah,
she is.
yeah. I mean, we should spend some time on that at some point
I was just
because
gonna say that to you.
maybe next episode we'll jump through the Alec Baldwin stuff and talk about some of the issues. But I posted that morning when I saw her take the stand to testify by herself. I said, "This is all over. She is screwed 10 different ways."
And she
But
should have kept her mouth shut after she sat on the stand and was questioned by the judge. But what did she do? She
yeah,
gave a second interview outside of the courthouse like an absolute imbecile.
she should have apologized. Is what she should have done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. She should have said, we absolutely screwed up, and we're going to go ahead and dismiss this case because it never should have been brought in the first place. That's a situation where a prosecutor makes a poor decision and good defense attorneys make a mountain out of a mountain about it, or they make a bigger mountain. And I think that's really important to do as a defense attorney. So what you have there though is cops taking that information and putting it in a separate pile so the defendant can't see it, and then somebody else destroys it. And so what they then get to say is, "Oh no, that was destroyed because that was put under tagged under this piece of evidence, and we never had a report or a suspect on that case, and so we just destroyed it pursuant to our policy." Boom. Nobody gets a dismissal for Youngblood. That evidence doesn't get to get used in something like the Kevin Cooper case. And that's exactly how appellate courts are able to hide from something like that. You can't prove that it was exculpatory. Why? Because the police destroyed it. You can't prove they did it in bad faith. Why? Because they made a mistake. They made an honest mistake, right? That's tragedy. And that's why
It,
somebody's
it,
sitting on death row right now.
it is. And, this story is so fascinating. I'm actually going to include, for anybody who's really interested in reading about this, um, there was a March 2004 um, report that was issued on the fact that California has wasted enough time on Kevin Cooper. It's really interesting reading, so you can learn more about this young man, Josh Ryan. The fact that his story had changed multiple times, that
Yeah.
originally they believed that they were looking for three Mexican men because earlier that day, three Mexican men had come to the house. I think he said to do some work. He talked about at first that it was three men that were attacking him. Then he went back and changed his story that he
That
didn't
was one.
remember
Yeah.
it was three men and that it was just one man. And
Yeah.
so this story is all over the place. And I'll tie this one off if it's all right with you by
Yeah.
saying, listen, one of the reasons why, in my humble opinion, I think prosecutors are trying to rely more on the science, the DNA, than putting people onto the stand is because witnesses are unreliable. I think
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
in a lot of cases, witnesses are unreliable. I think,
Yep.
the threat of perjury,
Yeah.
not being able to keep facts straight
Yep.
when you were hit from behind, and now all of a sudden, if you were hit from behind, how could you see three
Yep.
individuals? How but again, relying on a single piece of DNA evidence where the odds of a match are 1 in 310 billion,
Yeah.
man, we need this justice system looked at carefully before we start casting stones against some of these other nations that are handling legal
Well,
issues
yeah.
in the
I mean,
same way.
Absolutely. I mean, I know you want to tie it off, but let me just throw this in
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah.
We are one of very few civilized nations that still have the death penalty. And in 2004, Kevin Cooper is dragged into the chamber, right? This oddly green painted, you know, chamber that it looks like it's where like saturation divers go to be. And he gets on this gurney 42 minutes before execution. um his his execution was stayed by the Court of Appeals. I think it was the Ninth Circuit that ultimately stayed his execution. And so he goes back. He's he's lived probably the most torturous thing that any of us could go through. The knowing the actual date and time of your death, being dragged all the way up to it with a small percentage chance of having that stayed, and then boom, you're taken back. And he is still living under the threat of death, right? I mean, that's the tragic thing. So where does this all how does this all tie into our current Democrat candidate for vice president? Well, here's where it comes into play. As we all know, she was the head prosecutor of all prosecutors. She had the ability to order people to look into it. She could order, just as Gavin Newsom did previously, a special investigation into the issue. She could sift through the evidence. She could make a recommendation to the governor, um, to not only get this person off of death row, give him a retrial, or just release him. I mean, honestly, this guy's been in jail for so long and with evidence so fraught with problems. Why not do it? Why not just this is what I don't understand about this. Why fight so hard? Why not throw a bone, right? He's been in jail for long enough, effectively institutionalized. I don't think he's a threat to society anymore. The evidence is very weak for conviction. Why not do something about it? And I think we learned that the reason why Kamala Harris decided not to act was because she was beholden to the people that created this investigation. To the courts had decided that it whitewashed it by saying that it was okay. And poor Cooper doesn't have uh, anybody who donates large money to her campaign or to the campaigns of other people around her. And until somebody makes a stink about it, like the New York Times writes a piece about
Right.
him, or other newspapers in the area, until somebody makes a stink about it, nobody gives it any attention. And now people are raising issues with it. Gavin Newsom's like, oh, I'm gonna create a special investigation into it. And you know what he does with the special investigation? He whitewashes it again. He hires a law firm of people that he knows to look into it to satisfy this New York Times op-ed so he
That's
can
right.
release an investigation saying everything is okay. There's nothing to see here.
Right.
It's just corruption after corruption.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
injustice, and we need to hold people responsible for it.
I got
Period.
one final question for you
Yeah.
since you brought it up.
Yeah.
If you knew the exact date and time of your death, would you do anything differently between now and then?
Ooh. Depends on how much time I have.
Okay.
Probably spend more
Not
time with my kids. That's probably it.
okay.
You know what I do? You know what I do?
Yeah.
I would spend the rest of my time trying to say the things that I would want to say to them for the next 50, 60, 70 years, whatever, all in that space, and copy it down so that they can absorb it as they get older and know a little bit about their dad. That's what I would do.
I think I would do what Tim McGraw said in his song. I'd go skydiving and then
Yeah.
spend 8.7 seconds on a bull called Fu Manchu. If y'all if y'all aren't familiar with that song, and for those of you that don't know me, I am from South Georgia. I am country through and through. This is, my life. This is, for the better part of the last 30 years, where I've grown up here in Georgia. Uh, don't judge me for that because you don't know who I am yet. But yeah, there's a great song by Tim McGraw called "Live Like You Are Dying." So if you get a chance and you've never listened to it before, listen to that song. I think it's really good. So, um, Ron, I wanna take you to the next case.
Yeah.
Um, and for those of you that are thinking to yourselves, why are we talking about the specifics of these cases? Yeah, I get it. Ron's this big, criminal defense attorney. He's a Supreme Court attorney. He's got these amazing credentials. Why are we talking about these cases? It's because we're going to tie this directly to the presidential candidate, not in a biased way, but in a factual way that allows you, the viewer, the listener, to be able to say, wow, I wholeheartedly disagree with the things that the mainstream media is pushing as a narrative about who this person
Mhm.
is. Or you're going to say, I don't really have a problem with it. I'm okay because she's better than the alternative. That's up to you. That's not for us to determine.
Yeah, we
All
just
right.
hey, listen, we just wanna shed some light.
That's
That's
it.
that's what we're doing. That prevents the mold from growing,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what we gotta do
Yeah.
here.
And
Yeah.
and how do you like my glasses? I realized I was an old man when I started having to do this, and I have
You know,
these magnetic clip together glasses.
Sean, I always wanted to be one of those guys that could take a healthy pause on just about everything by going through the act of putting my glasses on and taking them off. Because I feel like every time somebody puts their glasses on to read something, the next thing they say is going to be the most profound and important thing.
Right?
I mean,
Right?
it's punctuation and I like it. So I'm
Especially like
envious.
Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson, man. You see, he doesn't put his glasses on. You know something big is about to happen when Peterson takes his glasses off and he puts the side piece,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
earpiece up to his mouth and he says, "Now, let me explain why you're an idiot." Okay. So let's talk about Jamal Trulove before I go too far down the road of Jordan Peterson, because I think this is one of the cases that, in my humble opinion, should haunt Miss
Well,
Harris.
it depends on what you mean by the word Jamal. That's really
That's right, because this is a case of mistaken witness ID, official
yeah.
misconduct, inadequate legal defense. I mean, this case is the trifecta of what is wrong with our justice system and why people from a low income area are so concerned with the state of the legal system. And Miss Harris, this is a case that she needs to be very concerned about, especially if it comes out in as a big talking piece.
So, two problems. There's more than two, but two that I'd like to highlight about the True Love
Yeah.
case before we dive into it. Number one, 50 people saw a murder and didn't say anything. That's the first injustice, right? Eyewitness testimony, difficult, but allowing, because of a distrust of a system, allowing somebody to go down like that, even though you know better, I hope that that sits on the conscience of those people and they realize what they've done and they pray for mercy every day because that is a lack of humanity. And our system only works if people do their job ethically, like Kamala Harris and all these other people. But it also only works when people stand up and say something when they see something. If you see the cops framing something, I don't care if you don't want to be bothered. I don't care if you're afraid of the gangs in the area or whatever. You know, I'm sorry, but boo hoo. If you want to have a better community and somebody gets murdered in your community, get down to the bottom of it and make sure that those people are held accountable because otherwise you are sanctioning gang murders and they are going to continue. Why does Chicago have such a high crime rate? It's because when people go in to solve those cases, they don't get the answers that they need. I'm not too sympathetic to cops on that because I do feel like they might have created a system where people are afraid to talk. But I think that's where we need to start fixing this. These parties need to get together. Community policing, protection of the people that are willing to stand up and do the right thing, rewarding them, helping them with anything they need as a result, and then making sure that we have accurate testimony. So, Jamal Trulove was a one eyewitness testimony case, predominantly because nobody stood up and said anything. So, we have one person who happened to be peeking out the window and sees what happened, goes to the police station, and I typically don't mention the names of witnesses and stuff. We'll just mention the defendant because he,
Right.
uh, you know, his name is everywhere on this. But um, goes to the police station, and the cops sort of already have their suspect eventually. Uh, Jamal Trulove was, I think he was on a VH1 reality TV show. He had just come back home. He
That's right.
was kind of working on his career, and the guy who was shot was actually one of his friends,
Yeah,
and he probably was around in that area, no doubt. But the reality is that the cops start to show photographs of probably a number of people who, and I don't know this for sure, but generally this is how it works. They know that a shooting has occurred in this project. They pull the pictures of people who have violent felonies in the area, and they may throw those on a board and say, "Does this look like any of these people look like the suspect?" They try to get a match, right? And then as that is occurring, she is not identifying Trulove as a potential suspect at all until she is specifically shown the photograph of Trulove, and the detective sort of puts her right onto that picture as being the potential suspect. And listen, that's what we've heard in the testimony, but when there's a rush to solve a case, who knows what else happened?
that's right.
Maybe they said, "Listen, we know it's Jamal. We know he was there." They can lie to witnesses. They they might have said, "He's already confessed to it." I mean, they can say whatever they want to behind closed doors to a witness like this before a show up. Now, she might repeat it later, but that's a risk that they take. So eventually, she points to Trulove, becomes somewhat of a sole eyewitness case. There isn't much in terms of other evidence that could possibly be used against him. And as a result, he gets wrongfully convicted of the murder. Do not pass go, go directly to jail, right? And then starts the fight for his exoneration, which once you're convicted is a very, very difficult, if not impossible thing to do, because there's a few factors at play here for good old Jamal. I mean, first, the standards of evidence are against you once you pass trial. Trial, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what they have to prove. But then when you move forward to the other phases, the standard is you have to prove something. It's not that the government has to prove something, against you. And that's a very concerning thing. Because if you were framed or if the cops committed misconduct, it's very difficult. So the next thing is it's very difficult for you to get evidence of your wrongful conviction. Your ability to get discovery, some of the tools that you'd have available, they're not going to be available anymore post conviction. Then the right to an attorney is something that you have throughout your trial phase, and you can have one throughout your appeal phase. But usually for a post conviction exoneration type thing, it's very difficult for a defendant to afford private counsel to be able to do something. And it's also very difficult for public defenders to take on these massive cases and start searching for, needles and haystacks for every person who thinks they're innocent. I get letters randomly from inmates all the time saying I'm innocent. I do not have the ability to go through their
Yeah.
case because even starting to do that is a very time consuming process. And so it's just stacked against him. But he was able to find people to be able to help him out, relatively good attorneys, filed a civil lawsuit against California and a couple of people involved.
Yep.
One of the allegations in the civil lawsuit was that this eyewitness individual was actually paid a sum of $60,000 during witness protection in order to protect her. Now, one has to wonder if that $60,000 is payment for reasonable living expenses or if it's to keep your dang mouth shut while all of this is going on.
Well,
And
I mean,
very, very concerning.
it is expensive to live in California. I mean, I get it. But let me ask you
Sure.
a couple of questions about this case.
Yeah.
So, am I correct in my remembrance of this story that
Yep.
there was no actual murder weapon found? There was no gun found. It was 8 casings that were found on a hill or in a trench on the way up to where the body was located. Am I correct in that? And the reason why Jamal Trulove was arrested is because he had a prior felony conviction, and as a convicted felon, being in possession of a firearm is a major no-no. Is that one of the things that possibly made him an easier target for conviction in a murder case?
Yeah, I don't know if the possession of a firearm, allegation got into evidence in his original trial. I'd have to look back at the transcript for that, but when I say that this was a one eyewitness case and solely a one eyewitness case, I mean it. I mean, this was the eyewitness. There was no physical evidence whatsoever, that corroborated that Trulove was involved. They simply weren't aware of the fact that there was a failed identification initially,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And if that happened, then the cops had violated something called Brady, which
Brady.
requires the prosecutors to provide exculpatory evidence. And the fact that the sole eyewitness against you failed to provide exculpatory evidence, is certainly Brady. This case is relatively easy for an appellate court to analyze, and they still screwed it up. And the reason why it's easy is because when we're weighing the evidence, this is not a healthcare fraud or physician drug trafficking case where there's
Right,
a million documents and witnesses and a difficult standard to understand. This is a murder. We know that there was a crime. The question is who did it? We have one person to say this person did it. The circumstances under which that person said it were completely screwed up. This is an easy case to handle for the appellate, judges, but they bungled it. Now, how many true loves are there in our country? How many true loves under Kamala Harris's prosecutions are there where the evidence is not so clear, where it's not just one eyewitness, but maybe the cops did a show up on this person incorrectly to have bad eyewitness testimony, but then maybe in another area they might have messed with the evidence. Maybe they got somebody else to kind of deny the alibi that maybe the defendant had. And when you get something like that, an appellate court will say, "Hey, yeah, they screwed up on the eyewitness thing, but there's also this other piece of evidence, right?"
right.
They thankfully they didn't, screw him over twice, so to speak.
So I have
Uh,
another question for you.
yeah, yeah,
So, obviously there are things that I've heard, through my 30 years of working with attorneys and being around the justice system. There's something called the golden rule. And
mhm,
I'm wondering if, as part of the appeals court decision to throw this thing out, to overturn this case, isn't isn't based partially on the prosecutor violating the golden rule. And here's why I ask that, right? Because in the closing arguments, the prosecutor told jurors that they should believe the eyewitness
yeah,
because this person was telling the truth because they had risked their life to testify against Trulove. And the prosecutor urged the jury to show the same courage that this witness did by testifying and to convict Trulove of first-degree murder with a firearm and being a felon in possession of a firearm. And he was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Now, the golden rule for people, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but
yeah.
the golden rule in the law is it's an argument, it's an attempt to persuade jurors to put themselves in the place of the victim or the injured person and deliver the verdict that they would wish to receive if they were in that person's position. Is that a fair?
Yeah, absolutely. It's bolstering. It's a violation of the golden rule. It would be considered an improper comment on closing. Oh, I just went through a closing argument where there were tons of improper comments. It is becoming more and more common these days as prosecutors have more and more pressure to convict. One of my old bosses, he was a major at the time, Zimmerman. A lot of respect for this man, Marine Corps major. As when I was a Marine Corps prosecutor, he was my first boss, and because I had cases literally dumped on me, fresh out of Naval Justice School and law school. Marines go to Naval Justice School, because the Marine Corps doesn't operate its own law school.
We won't
Uh,
hold that against you.
no, I appreciate it. I loved working with the Navy. They were fantastic, and it was nice to be able to have some pretty decent food over there in the Navy base in
Well, you
Newport, Rhode
Marines
Island.
always appreciate the Navy. They give you rides to everywhere you need to go.
That's no, that's absolutely right. I
Come on, that's a
do f-
line from one of our favorite movies,
I
man.
do feel that every Marine when they walk into Naval Justice School, having just come from, we're going to digress here, having just come from the basic school and some pretty hardcore training, I feel like we all have a little bit of Jessup inside of us where we're looking around and we're, you know, you get air conditioning and you don't know how it is on the front lines, so to speak, but that washes off you pretty quickly when you spend some time with the Navy and you realize that they do some of the hardcore stuff too.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
they do a pretty good job at it, and some good friends in the Navy. So um where I was going with that was Major Zimmerman, fantastic boss. And when I first sat down to talk to him, one of the things that he told me very early on was, when you get a lot of cases on your desk, you have to figure out, these are the ones that I really, really care about and I need to do something about for various reasons, prosecutorial priorities or whatever. And here are the pithy crimes that maybe don't have real victims associated with them or whatever. We need to get rid of some of those cases, deal them down, whatever. What we're realizing right now is that the decision on whether these cases should be treated as very serious cases and followed through on with all of our prosecutorial capabilities is not made on the injury to the victim or the importance of the criminal activity, but oftentimes now it's made for the decision to save somebody's career or to allow them to politically advance in that arena. And the problem with that is, you're not looking at cases as a prosecutor who has to do this one job. You're looking at cases as a politician. I think that the one thing that we could change in our system in order to fix that is that the ultimate prosecutorial discretion needs to go to somebody who is not a politician, and the ultimate prosecutorial discretion needs to rest with one individual who is responsible for the case. I think attorney ethics actually require it, right? But if she is only in charge of, I'm going to hire these prosecutors and I'm going to create policy for the office that is appropriate, but prosecutors get to decide what they charge and what they don't, and I will not pressure them, then we don't have political prosecutions. We don't have crap like this, right? We don't have situations like the Trulove case, where a prosecutor now has to stand up, and I'll go full circle with this,
Yep.
knowing that Kamala or whoever the boss is right behind them or is going to hear what happened. I see the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan in the back of the courtroom during closing arguments, and I think it's crazy. Why? Because first of all, you're flexing support for your prosecution team when you should silently watch justice play out, right? This is not us versus them. This is prosecutor builds a machine and puts on a case. I, as the defense attorney, get to rip all the wires out. That's my job. Nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be advocating for really one side or the other. So at the end of the day, political prosecutions are caused by the fact that we put politicians in charge of it. We saw this happen in OJ. They rushed forward. They probably could have convicted him if they didn't do that. And then they continue to do things like this in the Trulove case, where they launch a prosecution because they need a suspect, because they have one eyewitness. Somebody should have had some reason there and said, let's put a stop to it. We're not going to move forward on a one eyewitness case, especially where there was no first identification in that first lineup. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Tragic.
since we've had a chance to talk about two really incredible cases, and there's other cases, but I think from my perspective, if you want to know who a candidate is, especially if they're a former district attorney, a former attorney general, you have to look at their record. And the fact that Kamala Harris has in her career locked up more than 1,500 young black men and women for
Mhm.
smoking marijuana. Okay. And then laughing about it when she was asked if she ever smoked weed in college. I mean, that's a big problem for me. Well, one,
Yeah.
I her laugh bothers me, and I know I'm getting off track on this, right? But
Yeah.
you know, the fact that you have locked up 1,500 individuals from low income areas in the state of California during your tenure as a district attorney and then, your role as the attorney general, okay? And then being asked, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was on the Ellen DeGeneres show. I'm going by memory on this, but I believe it was Ellen DeGeneres who asked her after she talked about locking up all of
Yeah.
these 1,500 people, if she ever smoked weed in college, and she laughed about it. I mean, that's disturbing.
The laugh appears to me to be, kind of a verbal tick that some people might have. It's, it's a it's it's a pause. It's a way for her to collect her thoughts. There's a little bit of nervous in there that you can see. I actually think I
You're
think that
being a
Kamala
defense attorney, man.
I
You're
am
being a defense attorney.
no, no, here's what we have to understand where it comes from so that we can
Yeah.
understand what's behind it, right? And I think that that's where it comes from. I actually think that she has a little bit of stage fright. I really do. I watched her one of her early speeches when she was kind of first coronated, as my wife called it, to this position, right?
Yeah.
Because this wasn't an actual this won't be an actual convention; it'll be a coronation.
Yeah.
But I see this laugh and I see this shout out to all of these different people at the beginning of these rallies, and she's not diving right into it. She's not moving forward with confidence. I think that she was put into this position very quickly without having the 10,000 hours, as Malcolm Gladwell would call it, of stage presence in front of these big crowds.
Yeah.
Especially now, with what we saw with Donald Trump, we're not guaranteed that these crowds are safe anymore. I don't think that she really has a risk of that, but we're seeing that her ability to put together a real genuine thought or an idea is damn near impossible. We're seeing these weird statements like be unburdened by what has been being repeated over, and they don't even really make any sense. What does this all mean? We have somebody who doesn't really have good communication skills, who
Yeah.
is now going for the most important job in the United States. Now, what does that tell you about her past? Why is she not absolutely capable to make a solid speech? Why is she not capable of making solid decisions or of speaking eloquently about this stuff? Why? Because she doesn't have the ability. She just doesn't have the raw G2, as some people would call it. She doesn't have, and G2 is the military, code for intelligence. She just doesn't
Intelligence. Yeah.
have the intelligence. I'm sorry, but we don't see it. And let me just carry this a little further.
Okay.
This lack of intelligence that I see in her playing out tells me that she is going to listen to the same old things that people have been feeding candidates like her all along, right? The same old things. Barack Obama is an insanely intelligent person.
Absolutely.
Donald Trump is a really intelligent person. I'm not going to go insanely. I think he's more pragmatic and street.
Y
I don't know. Bill Clinton, very, very intelligent. There's some
Yeah.
pieces of paper out there that say that he's really intelligent. There are Democrats out there that are incredibly intelligent people.
Yes.
Give us one. Like, it's not that hard.
But I think the problem with giving us somebody who's intelligent
Yeah.
is that they won't be the puppet for the puppet master,
Well, that's
and they
exactly
don't
what I'm saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
they don't want a
Yeah.
free thinker. But
Yep.
here's something really interesting, and I think, one of the reasons why I believe, that Kamala there's many reasons why Kamala was put to the front of the ticket when Uncle Joe resigned from being the nominee going forward.
Yeah.
One, if they were gonna replace her, they needed to replace her when they began the, run for 2024. If he was gonna
Yeah.
replace her, he should have done it then because you can't replace her once Uncle Joe says, "I'm done," and now you put her at the top. You don't wanna put her at the top of the ticket. That defeats everything that you tried to paint as a
Yep.
visual for the American people by putting a biracial individual on the ticket as second in command. But
Yeah.
what I think is really interesting is Black Lives Matter, right? And BLM, I think everybody remembers them. And again, not gonna get into my positions on them, but I think it's very telling when BLM comes out and says, quote, unquote, "The American people do not want a president who incarcerated black men on simple marijuana charges and then gloated about smoking marijuana in her college days. She let people be sentenced to prison knowing full well that the marijuana tests were giving false positives, never disclosing that fact to defense attorneys. That's not the BLM supporter we have seen," end quote. I mean,
Yep.
that is an indictment of how bad people on the left actually think she is.
Well,
There's
yeah.
go ahead.
No, it's another example of the fact that we have another Manchurian candidate. We had one before with Joe Biden. We have another one with Kamala Harris. Going back to the replacement, there's some interesting things that happened here as a result of Joe's poor decision making. First, they didn't get to correct the record on Kamala Harris or whoever was going to be the candidate. There's been a lot of erasing of history going on. Now, mind you, I think that JD Vance took a chapter out of his book I learned recently, so I think he's doing it as well. But usually when a candidate decides to run, we're going to scour the internet and try to remove all of the harmful stuff and information. And they don't have a lot of time to do that with Kamala because she's not doing the pre-announcement announcement, and we don't have the ability. The second thing that happened was Joe elected not to make this decision before the primary, obviously, so that other candidates wouldn't come forward. And his hope was, I'm going to delay on making this decision. I'm going to have a debate. Then there's going to be pressure to replace. And the obvious choice has to be Kamala Harris. That way, we don't have infighting amongst the Democratic Party and we can have somebody like Kamala Harris. Now, who does that benefit? Who does it benefit that we don't have a convention and we don't have an actual contest? I'm sorry, a primary and an actual contest. It benefits the people who are pulling the strings of the puppet because they need a puppet who doesn't have the power of being elected popularly by the people. If we saw some random candidate on the Democrat side end up like Donald Trump, who is really caused a lot of power to come in his direction as a result of the people that appreciate him. If the same thing happened to some other Democrat, the people who pull the strings would not have the power anymore, and they needed to regain their power structure. They were about to lose it with Joe Biden, and they needed to get it with somebody else, and that's why we have Kamala Harris in this position. And we see historically this is exactly what she's done through her entire political career. Let me just go through a few things.
Yeah, please.
In her tenure as Attorney General, she required organizations to report all donors who contributed at least $5,000 to charity in a given year. Why does the government need that? But if I decide to give to Scientology $5,000, um, that's a private matter. I don't think the government gets to know that. But according to the Attorney General of California, she wants everybody to know that.
Right.
Failure to pursue equal justice under the law. There was a cop killer in 2004. A cop was gunned down. She didn't pursue the death penalty for that case at all. But we've got the Cooper case. We've got Trulove, all of that. She'd failed to disclose conflicts of interest. She dated Willie Brown. You've talked about Assemblyman Brown before, and she didn't disclose the conflict of interest related to that. There was an investigation into misconduct in her very office in 2015, as well as the Orange County jails. Nothing happened as a result of that.
Yep.
What are we seeing over and over again with Kamala Harris? She is there to protect the interests of the people that are putting her there. A lot of politicians are, but the difference with the one that we have on the Republican side is that he doesn't seem to owe anybody anything. And so we have a candidate who appears to at least genuinely say things that people don't like.
Yes.
And we have one who is trying to appease all of the people that like her, as well as all of the people who want to retain power structures.
That's right.
It's just not an honest collection of ideas.
Yeah.
And it's very concerning if somebody like that gets into office.
I agree with
That's
you.
how I feel.
I agree with you. I think there's gonna be a lot more coming out about Assemblyman Willie Brown. The fact that Kamala has come out numerous times stating that he is an albatross around her neck. Why would you say that
Yeah.
if it wasn't true? And if you
That's
weren't worried about the things that were going to come out, especially with Mr. Brown's loose and fast lifestyle with women on different arms at the same time while he was married and she was having an affair with him, um, where he got her a job making $72,000 a year and then an appointed position making an additional $97,000 a year at
yeah.
27 or 29 years old. What were her qualifications? Again, we had the laboratory technician case where cocaine was taken, samples were tampered. She knew this, her deputies knew this. She was scolded.
Yep.
Harris herself was scolded by the judge
Yeah.
because 600 drug cases had to be let go. But I
Yep.
want to, I want, if I can, because I don't want it coming from you or me, because I don't want people saying, well, you guys are biased. Give me one moment because I want to play
Yeah.
a soundbite. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this soundbite is incredibly, incredibly important because this is not a Republican. This is not a white man, because I know people want sometimes to play the race card, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. But this is a Democrat absolutely shredding Kamala Harris
Let's hear it.
in 2020 that led to the end, effectively, of her campaign.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
I mean, that right there does not come from a Republican. It does not come from, anybody other than somebody who was a Democrat
Yep.
running for the same elected political office in 2020, who was not afraid to come out and call this person out on her record
Yeah.
as the top legal enforcement official in the state of California. And
Yeah.
I think if people want to make this woman the next president of the United States, it shouldn't be because she's a woman of color, a biracial person. I think it should be based on the merits of what this person can do for this country. And as I've said to you in the past, if the Republicans were smart, just like they did with Joe Biden, shh,
Right.
let her do all the talking.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. I'm very interested to see what's going to happen in the debate. I think that Tulsi Gabbard raises some great points. I think there's going to be a lot of digging into Kamala's past, and she's going to have a lot to answer for. And this is one of the reasons why we need to have an effective primary process so that
Yes.
this person can be vetted. And last time she was put through that process, it did not work out well for her at all. She was, I think, the fastest candidate in history ever to be completely knocked out. I don't know if that's true, but it just felt like that.
No, it's the truth.
When
She was the first
when I
one
saw
out,
it,
and
yeah,
she garnered less than 3%
yeah,
interest in her when she was on the ticket by herself.
and that's where I just feel concerned that we were deprived of this ability. I mean, if we had somebody like Bloomberg put their hat in the ring, I'd be very interested to see what could come out. I'm very controversial guy, but had some pretty good ideas from a business standpoint. Um, there's a lot of other people. I know that gun rights folks don't like Bloomberg at all. I recognize that it would be quite divisive, but at least we would have somebody who, knew how to keep things moving, regardless of what some of the social issues are. mean, there's more misconduct that we could go into with
Yep.
her. I'm looking right now at a case that was filed in, I think it's in the, this was in California State Court, revealed that state prosecutors committed outrageous government conduct. In particular, the claim the prosecutors falsified was a transcript of a defendant's confession, which was defended by then California Attorney General Kamala Harris. If any single person was ever involved in overseeing a department where a confession was falsified against a defendant and used against a defendant, every single one of those individuals should no longer be able to hold office. Compare paying
100%.
an alleged hush money payment to an alleged porn, well, a real porn star, but alleged to have engaged in an affair with Donald Trump, right? Compare that to the falsification, right? Now, let's think about this. Donald Trump was not doing his own books at the time this Michael Cohen payment was created. The argument was that Donald Trump should have known that his people were doing this and that there were meetings about this and they should have known. Kamala Harris might say, hey, I wasn't involved in that falsified confession. I wasn't those cops, but she knew about it. She was the attorney general at the time. And in this Court of Appeals finding, they appear to believe that Kamala Harris has something to do with it. Which one is more criminal to you? I asked the people out there,
Yeah.
which one sounds a little bit more criminal? Putting somebody in a cage for God knows how many years for a false confession versus a hush money payment? I mean,
Yeah.
and she's going to stand up there, I'm sure, in the debates and say he's a felon. She's already tweeted this.
That would
He's
be a horrible mistake for her to
oh,
make,
yeah.
because I honestly, and again, I am not a huge Trump fan. Okay, I'm just not.
Yeah.
And I have my own reasons, and I'm not going to get into that. So before anybody comes out and says, "Oh, you're a blah 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 blah," no, nope, nope, we're not going down that road. But I honestly believe this BS conviction of Trump for what was an expired misdemeanor that
Yeah.
somehow they concocted into a felony charge, which
Yep.
had nothing to do with the state of New York, but was tied more to a federal law. And the fact that you had top ranking officials from the Justice Department leaving the Justice Department to go prosecute because they knew that Alan Bragg and his team weren't capable of doing it. I mean, look at
Absolutely.
Letitia Jones in New York. I don't need to say much more than that. But I think his conviction is going to be overturned. I think you just saw what happened in the case of Jack Smith, the special prosecutor appointed, in his case, where the judge said it was unconstitutional. He did not have the authority. He was not a properly voted in individual. He
Yep.
didn't receive the votes from the Senate to be confirmed into his position. Thus, the money used was unconstitutional against him. I think Trump's convictions get overturned. Say what you want about the E. Jean Carroll debacle, but
Mm.
for me, with Donald Trump, I don't think he was ever going to get a fair trial, regardless of what he was accused of in the state of New York. I just don't. But
Well,
we'll leave
yeah.
it at that. But this is about Kamala Harris and
Yep.
whether or not Kamala Harris is fit to serve as the president of the United States based on what appear to be past transgressions and at a minimum unethical behavior and at worst corruption.
Yeah. When I have to ask myself if somebody is fit, the first requirement is that you comply with your oath. That's the first requirement. I try to be a Boy Scout, don't get everything right, but the oath is the most important thing. I vigorously represent my clients. I, comply with everything that I'm required to do under my oath. That's the first thing that you have to do. Even if you get some things wrong, you get the benefit of the doubt there. But her oath as the attorney general and her oath as the vice president and her oath as the president is to faithfully execute the laws. You're part of the executive. You have to execute the laws. Okay. What does that mean? First, that means the Constitution. That means the right to a fair trial, right? That means the right to not have to go up against a corrupt system. That means that we are not trying to change the leveling of the playing field to disproportionately impact people. So even before we get down the road of, is she, knowledgeable? Does she have the skill to do this? Does she have the requirements? The first thing that we do is, does she have the capability of faithfully execute the laws of the state of California? Now, I understand those laws may be more confusing than any laws of any country anywhere. I heard Elon Musk talking about how there was a literal damned if you do, damned if you don't situation in California where he was required to hire employees that were citizens of the United States and had a solid background because they were working on weapons systems. But then he was sued by the government for failing to hire, other types of potential employees. So confusing laws, but Kamala Harris has a duty to uphold them. And that means fundamentally not turning her cheek when she sees something that looks like injustice. Now, I don't really have examples of Donald Trump and how he would act in that situation because he was part of the Department of Justice, for a while. Well, I'm sorry, Barr was his attorney general for a while. We had Sessions as well. And I'm not too convinced that Trump is going to do the right thing all the time as well. But one thing I know for sure is that Trump doesn't have political motivations to do the wrong thing. What might happen is that things might slip through the cracks and there might be some issues. That's not what I believe happens with Kamala Harris. You don't go out and require donors to have to publicly disclose, or charities publicly disclose who their donors are. You don't go out and turn the other cheek when there's corruption in the county jail system. You don't fail to disclose conflicts of interest if you're the type of person that complies with their oath and wants to do the right thing. So that's what I'll be looking for.
Yeah.
Is this just lip service, or is this somebody who actually wants to restore justice in our country? And I'm just not seeing it here. That your statement about marijuana use and then not dealing with these convictions of individuals is probably just the best example. We could just stop right there, I think.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the last thing that I'm going to say is, if you're seeing the hat that I'm wearing, I'm going to make a pitch right now to Cactus Ropes because I like you guys a lot. So let's see if I can get this thing right. For those of you that are into the team roping in the rodeo world, whether it's team roping, tie down, breakaway, on the ranch, or just for fun at home, Cactus has the perfect rope to fit your personal style and level of roping. So I hope somebody from Cactus Ropes out in Texas, in Pleasantville, here's my little pitch, and you like how it sounds, because we sure would love to have you guys hanging out with us on this show. So
that's
hey,
heartwarming. And
each
so
week I'm
awesome.
gonna try to find somebody to throw us a bone, man.
That's fantastic.
Ron, man, this was an awesome discussion. I'm so grateful that you and I have been able to come together. It's been a long time desire of mine to be able to get into a podcast that was tied to the legal world, but bringing the political landscape into it, as opposed to what you and I do each and every single day, which is healthcare law, regulatory compliance, operational management services, and things of that nature. To me, I love that work. That's been my passion for 30 years. But, talking about the political landscape, the American justice system, and how it impacts us every single day as human beings, as Americans. This is something that I've so much looked forward to being able to get this program off the ground. And I couldn't think of anybody else who I wanted to do it with, man.
Pure joy, Sean. I wish I could have recorded our short conversation on our random meeting in the Delta Lounge just the other day, because I feel like when we get together, things start to flow and some ideas come out, and it's that imperfect dialogue that I think really sharpens our axes going forward. And hopefully we can provide that to everybody out there in between pitches for ED medication.
All right, y'all. We'll be back soon with another episode. Take care.